In the summer of 1947, Pine Hollow, Alabama, learned a truth they could not comprehend. 11 of their most powerful white supremacist leaders were found hanging from the very tree they once used on Ezekiel Turner's family. Hours earlier, those same men had gathered confidently inside an abandoned sawmill, trading plans about how they would finish what they started, with the Turner name. They expected no resistance, no witness, no consequence. Yet, by dawn, their bodies hung in identical positions, ropes knotted in a way none of them ever taught each other. And Ezekiel Turner, an unarmed veteran who returned home alone, was seen walking away from that tree without a scratch. How did a single man turn the symbol of their dominance into the scene that destroyed their entire network? What happened inside those missing hours? Before we go any further, comment where in the world you are watching from and make sure to subscribe, because tomorrow's story is one you don't want to miss. The Greyhound bus lurched to a stop, brakes hissing like a dying animal. Ezekiel Turner, Zeke to everyone who knew him, stood and retrieved his duffel bag from the overhead rack. His army uniform, pressed sharp despite the long journey, bore the weight of 4 years overseas. The fabric showed creases at the elbows where he'd rested his arms during the 2-day ride from the discharge center in Virginia. Ribbons decorated his chest: Distinguished Service Cross, Bronze Star, Purple Heart. Each one told a story he'd never share with the folks back home. He stepped down onto the dirt road. Dust rose around his polished boots. Pine Hollow, Alabama, 1947. The town looked smaller than he remembered. The bus pulled away behind him, leaving him alone on the empty road. Morning sun painted everything gold, but the light felt thin, weak. Nothing like the fierce brightness of the Pacific Islands, where he'd spent years moving through jungles, silent as smoke. Zeke adjusted the duffel on his shoulder and started walking. The road stretched ahead, familiar as his own hands. He'd run these paths as a boy, raced Samuel's father, his late brother, to the swimming hole every summer. Now he was bringing home stories for Samuel. His son would be 9 now, old enough to understand some things, young enough to still look at his father like he hung the moon. Sarah would be waiting on the porch. He could see her in his mind, flour on her hands from making biscuits, that smile that made his chest tighten even after 12 years of marriage. Mama Ruth would be in her chair, Bible in her lap, humming those old spirituals she loved. He passed the Johnsons' farm. The cotton fields stretched to the horizon, plants swaying in the morning breeze. Nobody worked the rows yet. Too early. But Old Man Johnson usually sat on his porch about now, smoking his pipe. The porch was empty. Zeke kept walking. His boots made soft sounds on the packed earth. A dog barked somewhere in the distance, then went quiet. Too quiet. Something felt wrong in the air, thick and heavy, like the moment before a storm break. The Hendersons' clapboard house came next. Mrs. Henderson would normally be hanging laundry by now. Zeke could remember her waving to him when he left, telling him to come home safe. But when he approached, he saw curtains twitch, movement behind the glass, then nothing. The door stayed shut. Zeke's pace slowed. His instincts, honed sharp in combat zones where silence meant danger, started screaming. Something was deeply wrong. He passed the abandoned general store, its windows boarded up since before the war. The painted sign had faded to ghosts of letters. Everything looked the same, but nothing felt right. More houses, more closed doors, more faces turning away behind windows. By late morning, he reached the turnoff to his property. The fence that marked the boundary leaned at wrong angles, posts broken like someone had driven through without caring. Zeke stopped. His hand tightened on the duffel strap. The smell hit him first. Burned wood. Ash. The acrid stink of destruction. His cabin, the home he'd built with his own hands before Samuel was born, stood half-collapsed. The roof had caved in on one side. Black scorch marks climbed the walls. The windows were empty holes, Glass shattered and scattered in the weeds. The front porch where Sarah should be waiting was a pile of charred timber. "Sarah?" His voice came out rough. "Samuel! Mama Ruth?" Nothing. No movement. No sound except wind through the ruined boards. Zeke dropped his duffel and moved forward. Glass crunched under his boots. He called again, louder. "Sarah! Samuel!" Only silence answered. A door creaked somewhere to his left. Zeke turned, body automatically shifting into combat stance. An elderly woman emerged from the neighboring house, Mrs. Ellery, who'd lived there since before Zeke was born. She moved like someone expecting to be struck. Her hands shook. Her face was pale, eyes rimmed red from crying. "Mrs. Ellery," Zeke said quietly, "where's my family?" She wouldn't look at him. She stared at the ground, wringing her hands. "Mr. Turner, I tried to stop them. I swear I tried." "Where are they?" "They came 2 nights ago." Her voice broke. "A group of them. White robes, torches. They said your family was getting too uppity. Teaching Samuel to read from books that weren't approved. Sarah talking back to Mrs. Crawford at the market." Zeke's blood turned cold. "Where are they?" Mrs. Ellery pointed with a trembling hand toward the back of his property, toward the old ironwood tree that had stood there for 100 years, the tree where he'd built Samuel a swing, where Sarah liked to sit in the shade on hot afternoons. "I'm so sorry," Mrs. Ellery whispered. "I'm so sorry." She retreated into her house. The door closed. The lock clicked. Zeke walked. Each step took effort, like moving through the deep water. He rounded the corner of the ruined cabin. The ironwood tree rose ahead, massive and ancient. Its branches spread wide against the afternoon sky. A rope hung from the lowest branch. Just one rope, but he knew. He understood immediately what it meant. The frayed fibers swayed slightly in the breeze. Zeke stopped beneath it. He reached up slowly and touched the rope. It was rough against his fingers. Coarse hemp. The kind that left burns. The kind that... He couldn't finish the thought. His knees gave out. He knelt in the ashes where his home had stood. His uniform collected gray dust. The ribbons on his chest meant nothing here. All the freedom he'd fought for overseas, all the battles he'd survived, all the missions he'd completed, none of it mattered. None of it had protected the people he loved most. The sun began its descent toward the horizon. Golden light turned orange, then red. Shadows lengthened across the scorched earth. Distant voices carried on the wind. Zeke heard his name spoken in hushed tones. The town knew he'd returned. They were talking about it, wondering what he would do, waiting. Zeke remained motionless. He stared at the rope. He didn't move as the sky darkened. He didn't move as the first stars appeared. He stayed there, kneeling in the ruins, as night fell around him like a shroud. Sleep wouldn't come. He knew it wouldn't. So he simply watched the rope sway in the darkness and waited for something inside him to break, or harden. Pre-dawn brought no comfort. The sky held that uncertain color between black and blue, neither night nor morning. Zeke remained exactly where he'd been for hours, kneeling in the ashes, staring at the rope that still hung from the ironwood tree. His knees had gone numb. His uniform was covered in gray dust, but he didn't move. The rope swayed. A faint breeze made it twist, the frayed end drawing small circles in the air. Something shifted inside Zeke's chest. Not breaking, hardening. He drew a breath, deep, controlled, held it for a count of 4, released it slowly through his nose. Another breath. 4 counts in, hold. 6 counts out. The pattern was automatic now, drilled into him during those early training sessions before they sent him into enemy territory. Before he became the soldier who could lie motionless in wet grass for 8 hours, watching a Japanese supply line, counting officers, memorizing faces. His heartbeat slowed. The chaos in his mind began organizing itself into clear columns of information, facts, resources, objectives. Zeke stood. His legs protested, muscles stiff from the long night, but he forced them to work. He walked to the corner of the cabin that hadn't completely collapsed, the back section where the stone foundation still held. The floorboards there were warped from heat, but intact. He knelt again, this time with purpose. His fingers found the third board from the wall, the one with the knot that looked solid but was actually loose. He'd installed this hiding place himself, years ago, thinking he might need somewhere to keep important papers safe from fire or flood. The board lifted. Underneath, wrapped in oilcloth, was a box. Zeke pulled it out carefully. The metal container was cool against his palms. He unwrapped the cloth and opened it. Inside lay the tools of his trade: a compass, maps marked with grid coordinates from training exercises, wire cutters, a folding knife with a 5-inch blade, signal flares wrapped in waterproof paper, and lengths of thin cord designed for setting silent perimeter alarms. At the bottom, folded with careful precision, was a black scarf. Zeke lifted it slowly. The fabric was silk, taken from a parachute after his unit's first successful extraction. The men in his squad had started calling him Black Mamba after a mission in the Philippines. He'd infiltrated an enemy camp, disabled their radio equipment, and extracted intelligence without a single guard noticing until morning. Like the snake, silent, fast, precise, invisible until the strike came. Someone had embroidered the nickname onto the corner of the scarf in small letters. He couldn't remember who. Maybe Davis. Maybe Rodriguez. Both were dead now, buried in graves somewhere across the Pacific. Zeke set the box aside and stood, folding the scarf carefully. He needed information before anything else. Information required conversation, and conversation required appearing normal, controllable, non-threatening. He changed into civilian clothes, simple work pants and a shirt that had survived in a trunk. The uniform he folded precisely and placed back in his duffel. Then he walked into town. Mid-morning found him standing outside Reverend Clay's small church. The white paint had yellowed with age. The cross above the door tilted slightly to the left. Zeke remembered attending services here as a boy. Mama Ruth's hand warm in his, her voice rising strong during the hymns. He knocked. Reverend Clay opened the door almost immediately, as if he'd been waiting. The old man's face was lined with exhaustion. His eyes were red. "Ezekiel," he said quietly, "I wondered if you'd come." "Reverend, come in, please." The interior was dim and cool. Wooden pews lined both sides of a narrow aisle. Dust motes floated in the light from the single window. Clay led him to the front row and sat heavily, gesturing for Zeke to join him. "I'm sorry," Clay began. "Sorrier than I can say. Your family. Sarah was a good woman. Samuel was bright as a new penny. And Mama Ruth," his voice broke, "she was the strongest person I ever knew." Zeke said nothing. He waited. Clay seemed to understand. He folded his hands in his lap and spoke carefully. "The men who did this, they ain't just random troublemakers. They're organized, connected. The sheriff knows about their meetings. The mayor attends sometimes. Mr. Crawford, who owns the cotton mill, he provides the meeting space. Judge Patterson signs off on anything they need legal cover for." "Where do they meet?" Zeke's voice was calm, flat. "Different places. They rotate to avoid attention. But they got a main gathering spot. Old sawmill out past the swamp. Nobody uses it anymore. Been abandoned since the mill owner died back in '39. "How many?" Clay hesitated. 11 regular members, the leadership. Dozens more who follow their orders, but the main group is 11. Names? Ezekiel. Clay's hands tightened on each other. "If you go after them, they'll kill you. They'll burn what's left of your property. They'll make an example that'll terrify folks for a generation. You can't fight this system alone. Names, Zeke repeated. The Reverend closed his eyes. When he opened them again, they were wet. Sheriff Braxton, Mayor Whitley, Mr. Crawford, Judge Patterson, Deputy Simmons, Dr. Hartwell, Mr. Morrison from the bank, the Cassidy brothers, both of them, Mr. Pruitt, and Deacon Morse. Zeke committed each name to memory. 11 men, the same number of ribbons on his dress uniform upstairs in his duffel. They meet tonight, Clay added quietly. Midnight, at the sawmill. They're planning something. I heard talk about making sure no other families get ideas about stepping out of line. Thank you, Reverend. Ezekiel, please. Don't do anything that'll get you killed. Your family wouldn't want— My family is dead. Zeke stood. What they'd want doesn't matter anymore. He left Clay sitting alone in the empty church. Afternoon light slanted through the pine trees as Zeke walked the perimeter of the swamp. He'd hunted these woods as a boy, knew every game trail and hidden pool. The sawmill sat on the far side, accessible by one main road and two smaller paths that crossed the wetlands on rotting boardwalks. Zeke moved silently, his military training automatic now. He avoided dry leaves and brittle twigs. He placed his feet carefully, testing each step before committing his weight. He memorized sight lines, cover positions, escape routes. The sawmill came into view through the trees. The building leaned badly, its roof partially collapsed on the north side. Rust covered the old cutting equipment. Vines had claimed the walls, but the main floor space was clear. Someone had swept it recently. Fresh boot prints marked the dusty ground. Zeke circled wide, staying in the tree line. He found a position 50 yards out, with clear visibility, and settled into a depression between two fallen logs. Then he waited. The sun crawled across the sky. Zeke didn't move. His breathing stayed controlled. 4 counts in. Hold. 6 counts out. His mind worked through the tactical problem like equations. 11 men, 1 building, limited exits, predictable patterns. He'd faced worse odds in the Pacific. As evening arrived, a truck rumbled down the main road. Zeke watched through a gap in the logs as 2 men climbed out. The Cassidy brothers, based on their matching builds and red hair. They carried boxes into the sawmill, lanterns, chairs, a folding table. Another vehicle came 20 minutes later. Then another. By full dark, 6 vehicles sat outside the sawmill. Light glowed from the windows. Voices carried across the swamp, muffled but celebratory. Zeke waited until the last vehicle arrived. Sheriff Braxton's patrol car, unmistakable even in the darkness. Then he withdrew silently, retracing his path through the swamp. Nightfall found him back at the ironwood tree. The rope still hung there, a dark line against the darker sky. Stars emerged overhead, the same stars he'd navigated by during night operations, the same stars that had watched while his family died. Zeke pulled the black scarf from his pocket. He tied it around his left wrist, pulling the knot tight with his teeth. The fabric felt familiar, right, like putting on armor. Ezekiel Turner, the husband, the father, the son, was gone, buried with Sarah and Samuel and Mama Ruth. The black Mamba had returned. He settled against the tree's massive trunk and closed his eyes, not to sleep, but to rest, to prepare. Midnight was hours away. He would need every advantage, every edge, every lesson learned in 4 years of war. The rope swayed above him in the darkness. At midnight, it would serve a different purpose. The sawmill loomed against the night sky like a broken tooth. Zeke crouched in the underbrush 50 yards out, his breathing controlled and silent. The watch on his wrist showed 11:45 p.m. Inside the building, lantern light spilled through gaps in the weathered walls, casting long shadows across the clearing. Voices drifted through the darkness. Laughter, the clink of glass bottles. Zeke had circled the building 3 times over the past hour, memorizing every detail. The main entrance faced east. A side door hung crooked on the north wall. 2 windows on the west side, both without glass. The collapsed section of roof created an opening near the back. 11 vehicles sat parked in a rough semicircle, trucks mostly, plus Sheriff Braxton's patrol car and Judge Patterson's black sedan. He'd already placed his preparations. Signal flares positioned near the tree line, angled away from the building. Thin cords stretched across the main path at ankle height. His knife tucked into his belt, wire cutters in his back pocket. The black scarf tight around his wrist. The voices inside grew louder. Someone was making a speech. Zeke moved. He crossed the open ground in seconds, his footsteps soundless on the packed dirt. The collapsed roof section offered easy access. He pulled himself up silently, testing each handhold before committing his weight. Old lumber creaked softly, but held. Within moments, he was inside, balanced on a beam 20 feet above the gathering. Below, 11 men sat in a rough circle. Lanterns hung from hooks driven into support posts, their flames casting dancing light across weathered faces. Zeke recognized them all from Clay's descriptions. Sheriff Braxton with his gut hanging over his belt. Mayor Whitley, thin and sharp-faced. The Cassidy brothers, identical except for a scar on the younger one's jaw. Judge Patterson, white-haired and dignified-looking despite the company he kept. Mr. Crawford stood in the center, speaking. "Can't have them thinking they got rights. That Turner boy coming back from the war, his family getting ideas, it was necessary. A message, and the message is clear now." Murmurs of agreement rippled through the group. "We keep 'em scared," Crawford continued. "Keep 'em in their place. That's how we maintain order. That's how things stay proper." Zeke's jaw tightened. He forced his breathing to remain steady. Emotion was the enemy of precision. He'd planned this like every mission overseas, backwards from the objective. The goal wasn't chaos. It was control. Total, complete control over 11 men who believed themselves untouchable. The first flare ignited right on schedule. The distant whoosh and sudden bright flash drew every head toward the window. Zeke had positioned it to look like it came from the road. Vehicle headlights, perhaps, or someone approaching with a torch. The hell? Deputy Simmons moved toward the door. The second flare went off on the opposite side of the clearing. Then the third. Confusion rippled through the group. Men stood, reaching for weapons, shotguns leaning against the wall, pistols in belt holsters, their attention fractured in multiple directions. Zeke dropped the first smoke canister through a gap in the roof. Military grade, salvaged from his kit. It hit the floor with a metallic clunk and began spewing thick gray smoke. The lanterns became dim halos. Men started coughing, stumbling, calling out to each other. "Outside!" Braxton shouted. "Get outside!" They rushed for the door in a panicked cluster. The first man through, Morrison from the bank, hit Zeke's tripwire and went down hard. The man behind him tripped over him. The confusion multiplied. Zeke moved through the smoke like a ghost. His training had included operations in complete darkness, navigating by sound and memory. This was simpler. He knew exactly where everyone had been sitting, could track their movements by their shouts and footsteps. He took Deputy Simmons first. The man had separated from the group, moving toward the side door. Zeke came up behind him silently, wrapped the cord around his wrists, before Simmons even registered a presence. A pressure point on the neck, non-lethal, learned from his unarmed combat instructor, and Simmons slumped. Zeke lowered him quietly, secured his ankles, and moved on. The Cassidy brothers stumbled out the main door together. Zeke was waiting in the darkness beyond the lantern light. He used their momentum against them. A sweep of the leg, controlled falls, rapid wrist binding while they were still disoriented. Both secured in under 30 seconds. The smoke began clearing. The remaining men regrouped near the vehicles, coughing, weapons raised. 8 left. "Show yourself," Judge Patterson demanded, his voice shaking despite his attempt at authority. Zeke triggered the final distraction. a rock thrown to hit the patrol car's hood with a loud clang. All 8 men spun toward the sound, raising their guns. He took Mayor Whitley and Dr. Hartwell together, emerging from shadow, using precise strikes to sensitive nerve clusters. Both dropped, hands secured, ankles bound. Mr. Pruitt fired his shotgun blindly into the darkness. The blast was deafening. Zeke was already moving, circling, staying low. He came up behind Pruitt, struck the weapon from his hands, and had him restrained before the echoes faded. Sheriff Braxton tried to organize a defense. Back to back! Cover all directions! But military tactics required training and discipline. These men had neither. They clustered together, weapons pointing outward, voices rising in fear. Zeke used their fear. He moved through the shadows just at the edge of visibility, letting them catch glimpses. A shape here, movement there. Their shots went wild, wasting ammunition. When they paused to reload, he struck. Crawford went down. Then Deacon Morse. Then Judge Patterson, who tried to run and made it exactly 6 steps before Zeke caught him. Sheriff Braxton was last. The big man stood alone in the clearing, his revolver empty, breathing hard. He turned in slow circles, searching the darkness. "Come out and face me!" Braxton shouted. "Fight like a man!" Zeke stepped into the lantern light. He held no weapon. His expression was completely calm. Braxton's eyes widened. "Turner! You're supposed to be dead?" Zeke's voice was quiet. "Like my wife? My son? My mother?" Braxton raised his fists. "You're gonna hang for this. We're the law here. You can't—" Zeke moved. One strike to the solar plexus, precise and controlled. Braxton doubled over, gasping. A second strike to the back of the neck, measured force, non-lethal, and the sheriff collapsed. Within minutes, all 11 men lay bound on the ground, wrists secured to each other in a long chain. They were conscious now, coughing, bleeding from minor cuts and bruises, but alive, exactly as Zeke intended. He stood over them, silently. No words, no explanations. He simply gestured toward the swamp path with his knife. "You can't make us—" Crawford started. Zeke's expression didn't change. He simply waited. One by one, they struggled to their feet. Bound together, they had no choice but to move as a group. Zeke walked behind them, silent and watchful, as they stumbled toward the dark tree line. The march through the swamp took hours. The bound men struggled on the narrow paths, tripping over roots, splashing through shallow water. Mosquitoes swarmed. Frogs croaked from hidden pools. Mist rose from the water as the temperature dropped, turning the world into gray formlessness. Zeke said nothing the entire time. He simply kept them moving, a dark presence at their backs. When someone fell, he waited until they struggled back to their feet. When someone begged, he ignored it. When someone threatened, he remained silent. The darkness began lifting as they reached familiar ground. The ironwood tree emerged from the pre-dawn gloom like a monument. The rope still hung there, exactly as Zeke had left it. The men saw it. Understanding dawned on their faces. Some began to pray, others to curse. A few simply wept. Zeke worked methodically. He'd prepared additional ropes earlier, hidden in the undergrowth. Now he retrieved them and began securing the men to the tree's massive trunk, arranging them in a circle facing outward. Their bound wrists he tied to branches at shoulder height, forcing them to stand. "Please," Judge Patterson whispered. "Please. We didn't mean—" Zeke looked at him. Just looked. The judge fell silent. The work took time. Zeke moved with careful precision, testing each knot, checking circulation. This wasn't cruelty. It was justice. Cold, calculated, symbolic. The sun rose slowly, painting the sky pink and gold. The 11 men hung suspended against the tree they'd used for terror, the same tree that had held his family's bodies 2 nights before. Zeke stood back and studied his work. His face showed nothing. No satisfaction, no anger, no grief. Just careful assessment, like an engineer reviewing a completed project. He left them there as the morning grew warmer, returned to the sawmill and carefully staged the scene. Overturned chairs, scattered weapons, signs of internal conflict. Let them think the organization had turned on itself. Let the investigation go in circles. Protect the community from immediate retaliation. By mid-morning, he cut them down. They collapsed in a heap, unconscious or semi-conscious, traumatized but alive. He left them there for someone else to find. Then he walked to the opposite side of his property, where 3 fresh graves waited. He'd dug them the previous evening before beginning his preparations. Now he lowered the bodies of his family into the earth with gentle hands. Sarah first, then Samuel, finally Mama Ruth. He filled the graves slowly, patting down each shovelful of dirt. No words, no prayers, just the simple act of burial, giving them the dignity that had been denied. When he finished, he knelt between the 3 mounds. His head bowed, his hands rested on his thighs. The black scarf hung loose around his wrist now, the knot untied. Footsteps approached from behind, slow, deliberate. A man's boots crunching on dry grass. Zeke didn't turn. He'd heard the approach minutes ago. Recognized the gait. Expected this. Sheriff Elias Redden stopped 10 feet away. Not Braxton. Redden from the next county over. A different kind of lawman. Ezekiel Turner, Redden said quietly. Zeke remained kneeling. Found 11 men tied to a tree this morning, Redden continued. They're telling some wild stories. Claims about smoke and shadows. Military tactics. A ghost in the darkness. He paused. They also found your family's bodies in the county morgue. Coroner's been holding them, waiting for next of kin. Zeke said nothing. Redden moved closer. When he spoke again, his voice was different. Lower, more urgent. You've started a war larger than you know. Sheriff Elias Redden stood perfectly still, hands held away from his sides, palms open. The gesture was deliberate, careful, the kind of movement a man makes when he wants to prove he carries no threat. Zeke remained kneeling between the graves. His eyes stayed fixed on the fresh-turned earth. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across the disturbed soil. I'm not here to arrest you, Redden said quietly. If I were, I'd have brought deputies, a warrant, the whole show. He paused. I came alone because what I have to say can't be official. Zeke's jaw tightened. He didn't respond. I've been watching this county for 7 years, Redden continued, watching good people disappear, watching investigations get buried, watching files vanish from courthouses. His voice dropped lower. I've been collecting evidence the whole time. Building a case no one wanted built. The words hung in the air. A crow called from somewhere in the distance. Those 11 men you dealt with? Redden took a slow breath. They weren't the leadership. They were enforcers, front men. The real power sits in state offices, courthouses, bank boardrooms. He moved slightly closer. You cut off a few fingers. The hands still reaching. Zeke finally turned his head. His eyes were hollow, empty of everything except a terrible, controlled focus. Redden met his gaze without flinching. I have files, names, connections, everything I've gathered over 7 years of pretending not to notice. He gestured toward the road. Come to my office. I'll show you what you're really facing. Why? Zeke's voice was rough from disuse. Because they killed your family to send a message, Redden said. And because I'm tired of pretending the law works when it's rotted from the inside. The sheriff's office sat on the edge of the next county over, a modest brick building that shared space with the fire department. Redden led Zeke through the back entrance as dusk settled over the town. No witnesses, no official record of the visit. Inside, the office was sparse. A desk, filing cabinets, a single window with blinds drawn. Redden locked the door behind them and moved to his desk. He pulled out a key ring and selected a small brass key. "I keep the important files here," he said, unlocking the bottom drawer. "The ones that would get me killed if anyone knew they existed." He withdrew a thick folder, its edges worn from handling. Inside were dozens of pages, typed reports, handwritten notes, photocopies of documents, each page marked with initials instead of full names. Redden spread them across the desk. H.B. Judge Harland Boone sits on the State Circuit Court, runs the entire Northern Alabama operation. His finger moved to another page. J.M. State Senator James Markham controls funding, ensures investigations die in committee. Another page. R.C. Robert Carlyle, owner of 3 cotton mills, provides employment leverage. Anyone who talks loses their job, their home, everything. Zeke leaned over the desk, studying the documents. His expression remained flat, controlled, but his hands gripped the desk edge hard enough to pale his knuckles. "There's maybe 40 men total," Redden said, "spread across 5 counties. They meet quarterly, move money through shell companies, use the legal system to protect themselves." He looked at Zeke directly. "The 11 you took down were local muscle, expendable. The real leadership won't even notice they're gone. Then they'll notice what comes next," Zeke said quietly. Redden shook his head. "You can't fight them all. Not alone. They have resources, political protection, the ability to mobilize law enforcement across the entire state." He gathered the papers carefully. "Take these. Study them. But then, you need to leave Pine Hollow. Go north. Contact federal authorities who might actually listen. I'm not running. It's not running. It's surviving long enough to—" "I'm not running," Zeke repeated. His voice was completely calm, completely certain. Redden studied him for a long moment. Then he pulled out a separate stack of papers, copies, not originals, and slid them across the desk. "Then at least know what you're walking into." Zeke took the papers, folded them carefully, tucked them inside his jacket. "They'll retaliate," Redden said. "Not just against you. Against anyone they think might have helped you. Against the whole black community if they think it'll send a message." He moved to the window, peering through the blinds at the darkening street. "Blood breeds blood. That's how they operate. Then maybe it's time someone bled them dry." The words were spoken without heat, without rage, just cold statement of fact. Redden turned back. "You're talking about war. They started it when they put ropes around my family's necks." The 2 men stood in silence. The weight of what was coming settled between them like a physical presence. Finally, Redden nodded slowly. "If you're staying, then you need to be smarter than them. Faster. Always 3 steps ahead." He moved to unlock the door. "And you need to know who to trust." Which is almost nobody. Midnight found Zeke back at his property. The ruins of his home stood black against the starlit sky. The ironwood tree was a darker shadow among shadows. A figure detached itself from the tree line, moving nervously, hands raised. "Zeke, it's me, Jeremiah." Zeke's hand went to his knife. He recognized the voice. Jeremiah Cole, who'd grown up 3 houses down, who'd fished the creek with him as boys, who'd written letters during the war. Jeremiah stepped into the faint moonlight. His face was drawn, scared. "I need to talk to you. I need to tell you something." "Then talk." Jeremiah's hands shook. "I've been working for them. Not by choice. They threatened my sister, said they'd burn her out if I didn't cooperate." The words came fast now, desperate. "They made me watch. Report on who was organizing, who was talking about voting rights, who was making trouble." Zeke's expression didn't change. "I didn't know about your family," Jeremiah said quickly. "I swear I didn't know. They didn't tell me until after." His voice broke. "But I know who ordered it. I know who made the decision." "Who?" "Judge Harland Boone." Jeremiah wiped his face with shaking hands. You remember him. He gave the speech at your send-off ceremony, talked about patriotism and duty. Everyone respected him. The name settled in Zeke's mind. He remembered. The distinguished white-haired man in the expensive suit, the firm handshake, the words about defending freedom. Boone runs everything, Jeremiah continued. He decides who lives, who dies, who gets protected, and who gets… He couldn't finish. Why are you telling me this? Because they know you're alive. They know what you did to those 11 men. And they're coming. Jeremiah looked toward the road. Tonight. I heard them planning it. They're sending people to… Gunshots cracked through the night. 3, 4, 5. Coming from the road. Jeremiah grabbed Zeke's arm. This way. The swamp paths. I know them better than anyone. More shots. Voices shouting. Headlights sweeping across the property. Zeke let Jeremiah pull him toward the tree line. They crashed through underbrush, splashed through shallow water, ducked under low-hanging branches. Behind them, the voices grew louder, angrier. Here! Jeremiah yanked Zeke sideways into a thick stand of palmetto. Get down. Stay quiet. They pressed themselves flat beneath the heavy fronds. The foliage was dense enough to hide them completely, thick enough to muffle sound. Footsteps splashed past. Beams from flashlights swept overhead. Men cursed and called to each other. The search continued for what felt like hours. Gradually, the sounds faded. The searchers moved deeper into the swamp, away from their hiding place. Zeke and Jeremiah remained motionless, waiting, listening. The night sounds of the swamp slowly returned. Frogs, insects, the occasional splash of something moving through water. Dawn began to lighten the eastern sky. Still they waited, hidden beneath the palmetto fronds, as the search party finally gave up and withdrew. The first light of dawn came gray and uncertain through the cypress canopy. Zeke pushed aside the palmetto fronds carefully, listening for any sound that didn't belong to the swamp itself. Birds were beginning their morning calls. Water dripped from moss-heavy branches. No voices, no footsteps. He glanced at Jeremiah, who looked terrible. Mud streaked his face. His shirt was torn. His eyes were red-rimmed from exhaustion and fear. They're gone, Jeremiah whispered. For now. They emerged slowly, joints stiff from hours of motionless hiding. The swamp mud clung to their clothes and skin. Zeke's legs ached as they began walking, picking their way through the shallow water toward solid ground. Where are we going? Zeke asked. Somewhere safe. People who can help. Jeremiah moved ahead, following paths only he could see. There's a group. Veterans like you. They've been protecting folks, fighting back quiet-like. Zeke said nothing. His hand stayed near his knife. Trust was something he'd buried with his family. They walked for nearly an hour, circling wide around Pine Hollow proper. The sun climbed higher. The air grew warm and thick with humidity. Eventually they reached an abandoned barn set back from any road, hidden behind a wall of kudzu and wild growth. This is it, Jeremiah said. He approached the barn door carefully and knocked 3 times, paused, then twice more. The door opened a crack. An eye appeared in the gap. It's Jeremiah, he said. I brought someone. The man everyone's talking about. The door swung wider. A tall black man stood there, military bearing obvious in the way he held himself. His eyes swept over Zeke, taking in the dried swamp mud, the controlled posture, the watchful gaze. You're Turner, the man said. It wasn't a question. I am. Come inside, both of you. The barn's interior was surprisingly organized. Crates served as chairs and tables. Maps hung on the walls. Radio equipment sat in one corner, covered with canvas. 3 other people waited inside, 2 men and a woman, all watching Zeke with cautious interest. The tall man who'd opened the door gestured around the space. Welcome to the Ironwood Circle. I'm Miles Carter. That's Reuben Shaw, our medic. Nora Langston handles communications, and you've already met our sometimes reliable informant, Jeremiah. Jeremiah flinched at the description, but said nothing. Miles studied Zeke for a long moment. We heard what you did to those 11 men. The whole county's talking about it. Some folks are scared. Some are celebrating quietly. And some, he paused, some are wondering if you're going to get everyone killed. That's not my intention, Zeke said. Intentions don't mean much when you're dealing with people who'll burn down a whole neighborhood to make a point. Miles crossed his arms. But we're not here to lecture you. We're here because we're fighting the same fight, just with different methods. Reuben Shaw stepped forward. He was stockier than Miles, with gentle eyes and careful movements. You're hurt, he said, noticing the way Zeke favored his left side. Let me look at that. It's nothing. It's something if you can't move right when you need to. Reuben's voice was firm but kind. Sit down. Let me work. Zeke hesitated, then lowered himself onto a crate. Reuben examined the bruising along his ribs where he'd crashed through underbrush during the escape. His hands were professional, efficient. Nora Langston moved to the radio equipment. She was thin and sharp-featured, with intelligent eyes that seemed to calculate everything they saw. We've been monitoring local law enforcement frequencies, she said. The search parties gave up about 2 hours ago. They're regrouping, planning something bigger. Miles pulled out a chair and sat across from Zeke. We need to share information. You have pieces we don't. We have pieces you don't. Together, maybe we can see the whole picture. Zeke reached inside his jacket and withdrew the papers Redden had given him. They were damp from the swamp, but still readable. He spread them on a makeshift table, a sheet of plywood balanced on crates. Sheriff Redden gave me these last night. Names, connections, the larger network. Miles leaned forward, studying the documents. His expression grew darker with each page. Jesus, I knew it went higher than the local thugs, but this… He looked up at Nora. This is Judge Boone, Senator Markham, half the county commissioners. Nora came over, examining the papers carefully. This matches what we've been piecing together from radio chatter and surveillance. But Redden actually documented it. Names, dates, money transfers. We have more, Miles said. He moved to a trunk in the corner and pulled out a rolled map. When he spread it on the table, it showed all of northern Alabama marked with different colored pins. Red pins are confirmed supremacist leadership. Blue pins are their meeting locations. Yellow pins are families we've evacuated or protected. The map was covered in pins, dozens of them. The pattern was clear. A coordinated network spanning 5 counties, just as Redden had said. We've been tracking them for 8 months, Miles explained. Ever since we all came home from the war and realized nothing had changed, that the freedom we fought for didn't extend to our own communities. His jaw tightened. We started small, warning families, helping people disappear before raids, sabotaging equipment they used for intimidation. How many families have you helped? Zeke asked. 17, Reuben said quietly. Moved them north, got them train tickets, new names. A chance to start over somewhere. The Klan doesn't run everything. Jeremiah spoke up from where he stood near the door. They also stopped 3 lynchings, showed up with enough armed men that the mobs backed down. And they burned down the printing press that was publishing hate propaganda. We fight smart, Miles said. Not loud. We don't give them targets. We don't give them martyrs to rally around. He looked at Zeke directly. What you did was loud, very loud. And now they're coming down hard on everyone. I know. Do you? Nora's voice was sharp. We have reports of roadblocks going up, searches of black homes without warrants. They're looking for you, and they're tearing apart the whole community to find you. Then I'll give myself up. No. Miles's voice was firm. That's not how this works. You die. You become a story they tell to keep everyone else scared. You run, same thing. What we need is to dismantle them, completely. So there's nothing left to retaliate with. Zeke studied the map again. How? Evidence, Nora said. Real documentation. Testimony. Something that forces federal intervention. The local law is corrupted. County law is corrupted. State law is corrupted. But if we can get proof to Washington, to people who aren't in the network, they'll have to act. We've been gathering pieces, Miles said. But we need the big fish. We need to catch them in the act, record their meetings, document their plans. He tapped the map where a blue pin marked Judge Boone's property. They're meeting tomorrow night. Here. We've been watching the location for weeks. Then we go there, Zeke said. We observe, Miles corrected. We record. We gather evidence. We don't engage unless absolutely necessary. The morning stretched into afternoon as they planned. Zeke shared what he knew about surveillance techniques from his military training. Miles outlined the routes to Boone's property. Nora explained the recording equipment she'd acquired, a wire recorder, barely portable, but functional. Reuben prepared medical supplies in case things went wrong. By mid-afternoon, they were ready. Miles, Zeke, and Nora would handle the reconnaissance. Reuben and Jeremiah would stay at the barn, monitoring radio frequencies for any signs of coordinated law enforcement activity. The drive to the observation point took 2 hours. They used back roads, avoiding any main routes. Miles drove an old farm truck that wouldn't attract attention. They parked a mile from Boone's property and approached on foot through dense woods. The judge's house was large, well-maintained, surrounded by manicured lawns. A separate building sat behind it, a converted carriage house that Boone used as his private office. They settled into position on a wooded hillside with clear sightlines to the carriage house. Nora set up the wire recorder, careful and methodical. Miles had binoculars. Zeke simply watched, his eyes trained from years of observation work. Cars began arriving as dusk fell, expensive vehicles, men in suits. Some Zeke recognized from the documents, faces he'd studied in Redden's files. That's Senator Markham, Miles whispered, watching through the binoculars. And there's Carlyle, the mill owner. One by one, they entered the carriage house. Lights came on inside, but heavy curtains prevented anyone from seeing in. Zeke counted. 12 men total, all high-ranking, all powerful. Can you hear anything? Miles asked Nora. She adjusted equipment carefully. Give me a minute. They waited. The wire recorder's spools turned slowly. Static crackled through Nora's headphones. Then voices came through, faint but audible. Nora's expression sharpened. She began taking notes, writing quickly in shorthand. They're discussing retaliation plans, she whispered, talking about making examples, burning homes, targeting anyone who might be sheltering Turner. Zeke's jaw tightened, but he remained motionless. Boone's leading the discussion, Nora continued. He's saying they need to reassert control, that the Turner situation showed weakness, that they need to remind everyone who holds power. The recording continued for nearly an hour. Names were mentioned, specific targets identified, plans outlined in terrible detail. Finally, the meeting ended. The men emerged, shook hands, drove away in their expensive cars. Miles, Zeke, and Nora waited another 30 minutes before packing up. They moved silently back through the woods to the truck. We got it, Nora said once they were safely away. Clear audio. Names, plans, everything. They drove back to the barn as night settled completely over the countryside. Inside, Reuben and Jeremiah waited anxiously. The group gathered around as Nora played back portions of the recording. The voices were tinny but clear. Boone's cultured tones describing acts of terror with the same casual ease he might use discussing crop yield. This is it, Miles said quietly. This is what we need. Reuben pulled out cornbread and beans he'd kept warm. Simple food, but welcome after the long day. They ate together, passing around the single pot, sharing water from a common jug. What's next? Jeremiah asked. We need to verify the other targets they mentioned, Miles said. Warn those families. Get them to safety before the retaliation starts. He looked at Zeke. Then we figure out how to get this recording to people who can actually use it. Federal investigators, Nora said. Someone outside the state corruption network. Who do we trust? Reuben asked. Nobody local, Miles said. We need to go higher. Maybe the Adrillon ACP. Maybe the Justice Department directly. They talked through possibilities as the evening grew late. Finally, Miles suggested they sleep in shifts. Keep watch. Make sure no one had followed them. I'll take first watch, Zeke said. The others bedded down on blankets spread across the barn floor. Within minutes, exhaustion claimed them. Zeke positioned himself near the door, where he could see outside through gaps in the wood. The night was quiet at first, peaceful, stars visible through broken sections of the roof. Then, in the distance, dogs began barking. Not the usual night sounds. These were tracking dogs, hunting dogs. The sound grew louder, more insistent. Zeke listened carefully, tracking the direction. The dogs were moving, searching, coming closer. He didn't wake the others yet, not until he was certain. But his hand moved to his knife, and his body settled into the ready stillness that had kept him alive through countless dangerous nights overseas. The hunt was continuing, and they were still the prey. The dogs' barking faded just before dawn. Zeke waited another hour, watching the tree line, before he gently shook Miles awake. They were close, Zeke said quietly. Tracking dogs, maybe half a mile out before they turned away. Miles sat up, instantly alert, despite the short sleep. They're sweeping the area, probably hitting every abandoned building between here and town. Then we move today. Stay ahead of them. Miles nodded and woke the others. Within minutes, the circle was gathering their equipment, checking weapons, preparing for the day ahead. No one complained about the early hour. They all understood the urgency. Nora spread the map across the table while Reuben distributed hardtack and dried fruit, quick food they could eat while working. The morning light filtering through the barn's gaps gave them just enough illumination to see clearly. We need to divide our efforts, Miles said. We've got solid audio from Boone's meeting, but we need financial proof. Documentation that shows money flowing from legitimate businesses into organized violence. The mill, Jeremiah said. There's an accountant there, Harold Finch. He keeps 2 sets of books, one official, one real. I've seen him at meetings. Can we access them? Zeke asked. His office is in the main building, but he keeps the real ledgers at home. Small house on Cypress Street. Lives alone. Usually leaves for the mill by 7:30. Miles checked his watch. That gives us 2 hours. I'll go, Reuben volunteered. I can pick the lock. Get in and out, quietly. Take Jeremiah, Miles said. He knows the layout. Zeke studied the map, his finger tracing routes near the train depot. The telegrams. If Boone is coordinating with the state senator, there'll be communication records. The depot keeps copies for 30 days. Storage shed behind the station, Nora said. I've seen the clerk filing them there. That's our target, Zeke said. Miles, you come with me. Nora, you stay here and transcribe more of the recording. We need written documentation to go with the audio. They moved efficiently, years of military training evident in how smoothly they operated. Reuben and Jeremiah left first, taking the truck. Zeke and Miles waited 15 minutes, then headed out on foot through the woods toward the depot. The storage shed was exactly where Nora had indicated, a small wooden structure tucked behind the main station building. The morning train wasn't due until 9 o'clock. The platform was empty. Miles kept watch while Zeke worked the lock. Simple mechanism. Nothing like the complex systems he'd encountered overseas. It opened in seconds. Inside, filing cabinets lined one wall. Telegraph copies were organized by date, stuffed into folders that overflowed with thin yellow papers. Zeke pulled out anything from the past month, scanning quickly for names he recognized. Boone, Markham, Carlyle. There. A telegram from Boone to Senator Markham dated 3 days before Zeke's family was killed. Situation requires immediate example. Turner family identified as primary target. Proceed with coordinated action. Zeke's hands steadied as he carefully folded the telegram and pocketed it. He continued searching, finding more. Communications about shipments. References to disciplinary action. Coded language that meant violence but was phrased to seem legitimate. "We've got 5 minutes," Miles whispered from the door. Zeke gathered everything relevant, perhaps 30 telegrams total. He reorganized the remaining papers to hide the gaps, then slipped out. Miles locked the door behind them. They walked away calmly, just 2 men taking a morning stroll, and disappeared into the woods before anyone arrived for the day's work. Back at the barn, Reuben and Jeremiah had already returned. 3 heavy ledgers sat on the work table, their pages filled with neat columns of figures. "Finch wasn't home," Reuben explained. "Left early. We had the place to ourselves." Nora had finished transcribing key portions of the audio recording. Now she examined the ledgers, her eyes moving quickly across the entries. "This is it. This is everything. Look. Payments to security personnel that match dates of known attacks. Equipment purchases that align with reported incidents. Even payments to law enforcement for special services." They spent the morning analyzing everything together. Zeke laid out the telegrams chronologically. Nora cross-referenced them with the ledger entries. Miles marked locations on the map. Reuben documented injuries and deaths that corresponded to the financial records. A pattern emerged. Clear. Undeniable. A systematic campaign of terror funded through legitimate businesses and coordinated at the highest levels of county and state government. "This proves everything," Nora said quietly. "The organization, the funding, the political protection, everything. It proves they're criminals," Miles said. "Now, we need to get it to someone who can act on it." "Agent Collier," Zeke said. "Redden mentioned him. Federal investigator working quietly. Arriving tomorrow on the 11 o'clock train." "Can we trust him?" Jeremiah asked. "Can we trust anyone?" Miles countered. "But if Redden vouches for him, and if he's federal, he's our best option." By midday, they had organized everything into a comprehensive file. Photographs of key documents, the wire recording, written testimony, a complete map of the network. "We need to stay mobile," Zeke said. "If they're sweeping the area, this barn won't be safe much longer." Miles agreed. "But first, the Harrisons. They're on Boone's list from the recording. We heard him name them specifically. They've got a raid planned for tonight." The Harrison family lived on a small farm 3 miles south. Thomas Harrison worked as a schoolteacher. His wife, Clara, took in sewing. They had 4 children, the youngest barely 2 years old. Zeke and Miles approached carefully that afternoon, watching for surveillance. The house looked peaceful. Laundry hung on a line. Children played in the yard. Thomas answered the door cautiously. His expression changed when he recognized Miles. "We need to talk," Miles said quietly. "Inside." In the modest kitchen, Zeke explained what they'd learned. Thomas's face went pale. Clara gripped the edge of the table. "When?" Thomas asked. "Tonight, after midnight. They're planning to burn your house and make it look like an accident." "Dear God." Clara's voice shook. "The children. Pack what you can carry," Miles said. "We have a place you can stay. Just for a few days, until we can get you on a train north." "We can't just leave," Thomas protested. "This is our home. My students." "Your students need you alive," Zeke said. His voice was gentle but firm. "Your children need you alive. Right now, staying here means dying. We're offering you a chance to live." Thomas looked at his wife. She nodded slowly, tears in her eyes. They helped the family pack quickly. Essential documents, clothing, a few precious photographs. The children were told they were going on an adventure. Within an hour, they were ready. Reuben met them with the truck at a prearranged location. The Harrisons climbed into the back, covered with canvas. They would stay at a different safe house, one the Circle had maintained for exactly this purpose. As they drove away, Thomas gripped Zeke's hand through the canvas. "Thank you. Thank you for warning us." Zeke nodded but said nothing. What was there to say? That this was happening to dozens of families? That the system designed to protect them instead hunted them? They returned to the barn as night fell. Nora had prepared a simple meal: beans and rice, strong coffee. They ate quietly, exhausted from the long day. The evidence lay spread across the work table. Undeniable proof of systematic violence. Tomorrow they would hand it to Agent Collier. Tomorrow they would take the first real step toward dismantling the machine. "Get some rest," Miles said. "We need to be sharp tomorrow." They bedded down on the floor again. The barn was cold, the blankets thin, but none of them complained. They'd all slept in worse conditions. Zeke lay awake, staring at the ceiling. His mind replayed the telegrams he'd read, the casual way Boone had ordered his family's death, the bureaucratic language used to describe murder. He dozed fitfully. Nightmares came in fragments: the ironwood tree, Sarah's face, Samuel's laughter cut short. He jerked awake repeatedly, disoriented, reaching for weapons that weren't there. Each time, he forced himself to breathe slowly, to return to the present, to remember that tomorrow brought possibility. But the sense of danger never left. It crawled along his spine, persistent and familiar. The same feeling he'd had before ambushes overseas, before surprise attacks, before everything went wrong. Something was coming. He knew it with the certainty that had kept him alive through the war. He just didn't know what yet. Dawn arrived gray and cold, the kind of morning that promised nothing good. Zeke woke stiff from another restless night, his shoulder aching from sleeping on the hard floor. Around him, the others were already stirring, moving quietly through their morning routines. Miles stood by the barn door, watching the road through a gap in the boards. Nora sorted through the documents one final time, double-checking that everything was in order. Reuben cleaned his rifle methodically, the motion automatic after years of military discipline. "Today, we hand it off," Miles said quietly. "Today we actually do something that matters." There was cautious hope in his voice. Real hope. The kind that came from believing that maybe, just maybe, the system could work if you pushed hard enough. That federal authority might actually protect them instead of look the other way. Zeke wanted to believe it too. Wanted to think that Agent Collier would take their evidence and use it to tear down the network that had killed his family. That justice might come through official channels rather than personal vengeance. But that feeling from last night lingered, the certainty that danger was close. Nora brought out cold biscuits left over from yesterday and a jar of preserves. Not much of a breakfast, but enough. They ate standing up, too tense to sit. "We split up going into town," Zeke said between bites. 2 and 3. Different routes. We don't all arrive at the depot together. "Nora and I will go first," Reuben said. "We'll position near the station house. Watch for trouble. Miles, you take the south approach," Zeke continued. "Keep eyes on the platform itself." "And you?" Miles asked. "Jeremiah and I will come from the east. We'll have the documents. If anything seems wrong, we scatter and regroup tonight at the secondary location." They'd planned for this, rehearsed it mentally. Everyone knew their role. Miles checked his watch. "Train arrives at 11. Collier should be in the third passenger car. We make contact, hand off the evidence, and disappear. Simple." Nothing was ever simple, but they all nodded anyway. Reuben and Nora left first, taking a footpath that wound through the woods toward town. Miles departed 15 minutes later, moving quickly across open fields. That left Zeke and Jeremiah alone in the barn. Zeke was securing the documents in a weatherproof satchel when Jeremiah approached. The younger man's hands were shaking. His eyes looked hollow, like he hadn't slept at all. "Zeke," Jeremiah said quietly, "I need to tell you something." Zeke looked up. Waited. They found me 2 nights ago, after I helped you escape. Jeremiah's voice cracked. They know I was with you. They know I helped. What did they do? Boone himself came. Said they'd kill my mother, my sisters. Said I had to cooperate or watch them burn. Jeremiah's hands clenched into fists. I tried to mislead them, gave them false information, sent them looking in the wrong places. But I think they know. I think they're tracking us. Zeke set down the satchel. He placed a hand on Jeremiah's shoulder, feeling the tremor running through the younger man's body. You did what you had to do, Zeke said. To protect your family. I understand that. But I might have led them here, to all of you, to this. Then we adapt. We've adapted before. Zeke's voice was steady, calm. We don't have time for guilt right now. We have a mission. After that, we'll figure out what comes next. Jeremiah nodded, though he still looked broken. They gathered the satchel and slipped out of the barn, moving quietly through the morning shadows. The walk into town took 40 minutes. They stayed off the main roads, cutting through properties where they knew the owners wouldn't cause trouble. The sky remained overcast, threatening rain. By 10:30, they were in position near the depot. Zeke could see Reuben leaning against the station house wall, apparently reading a newspaper. Nora sat on a bench with a basket, looking like someone waiting for family. Miles was nowhere visible, which meant he'd found a good vantage point. Everything seemed normal. Morning passengers milled about. The ticket clerk helped an elderly woman. A porter wheeled luggage across the platform. But Zeke's instincts screamed wrong. He couldn't identify what. Just a feeling. A tension in the air that reminded him of moments before an ambush. The train whistle sounded in the distance. 11 o'clock approaching. Jeremiah stood beside him, rigid with anxiety. Something's not right. I know, Zeke said quietly. The train appeared around the bend, slowing as it approached the station. Black smoke puffed from the engine. Brakes squealed. The locomotive hissed to a stop, right on schedule. Passengers began to disembark. A businessman with a briefcase, a woman with 2 children, an elderly man moving slowly with a cane. No Agent Collier. Zeke scanned every face, every person stepping onto the platform. The third passenger car emptied completely. Still no one matching the description Redden had provided. Then he heard it. A single gunshot. Distant, but unmistakable. From the far side of the train, near the baggage car. Screams erupted. Passengers scattered. The porter dropped a suitcase and ran. Zeke moved forward instinctively, but Jeremiah grabbed his arm. Wait! Look! Smoke. Rising from the north. Thick and black. From the direction of the barn. Everything happened at once. Reuben broke from his position, sprinting toward the smoke. Nora followed. People on the platform panicked, running in all directions. The train engineer was shouting something Zeke couldn't hear. Zeke ran, too, the satchel clutched tight against his chest. Jeremiah kept pace beside him. They cut through an alley, racing toward the barn. Gunfire cracked ahead. Not random shots. Coordinated fire. An ambush. Zeke saw Reuben go down first, his body jerking backward before crumpling into the dirt. Nora screamed and dove behind a water trough. Miles appeared from somewhere, returning fire, trying to cover their retreat. "Get down!" someone shouted. Zeke didn't know who. He was already moving, military instincts taking over. He pulled Jeremiah behind a fence, assessing positions, looking for escape routes. More gunfire. So much of it. Too many shooters. They'd walked straight into a trap. He saw Nora run from the trough toward a shed. She made it 3 steps before bullets tore through her body. She fell without a sound. Miles was still firing, backing toward the woods. "Go!" he shouted at Zeke. "Get out! Get!" The shot hit Miles in the chest. He staggered, fired one more round, then collapsed. Zeke felt the impact before he heard the sound. The bullet punched through his left shoulder, spinning him sideways. Pain exploded through his arm. The satchel fell from his grip. Jeremiah grabbed it, grabbed Zeke, dragged him toward a drainage ditch that ran behind the buildings. They tumbled into it together, water soaking through their clothes. Zeke's shoulder burned like fire. Blood ran down his arm, mixing with the muddy water. "Stay down," Jeremiah hissed. "Stay quiet." Footsteps above them. Men searching. Voices calling to each other. The sound of a truck engine starting. Through his pain, Zeke saw them. 3 men loading boxes into a truck bed. The documents, the evidence, everything they'd gathered, being taken away. "No," he tried to say, but Jeremiah clamped a hand over his mouth. "You'll get us killed," Jeremiah whispered. "We have to go. Now." They crawled through the ditch, moving away from the voices. Zeke's shoulder screamed with every movement. He could feel blood pulsing out with each heartbeat. Too much blood. Jeremiah pulled him into the swamp when they reached the edge of town. The familiar paths, the ones only locals knew. Dense vegetation swallowed them as they pushed deeper into the wetlands. Behind them, Pine Hollow burned. Smoke rose into the gray sky. Somewhere in that chaos, Reuben and Nora lay dead. Miles, too, probably. The ironwood circle destroyed in minutes. All their work, all their evidence, gone. Zeke stumbled, his legs giving out. Jeremiah caught him, kept him moving. The world tilted sideways. Fever was already setting in, infection spreading through his wounded shoulder. "Keep going," Jeremiah urged. "Just a little further." They finally stopped deep in the swamp, where the water ran black and the trees grew so thick the sky disappeared. Zeke collapsed against a cypress trunk, gasping for breath. His shoulder throbbed, his vision blurred. Rain began to fall. Soft at first, then harder. Cold drops that soaked through their clothes and made everything worse. Jeremiah tore strips from his shirt, trying to bandage Zeke's wound. His hands shook badly. "I'm sorry," he kept saying. "I'm so sorry. This is my fault. They followed me. They knew because of me." Zeke couldn't respond. Couldn't tell him it wasn't his fault. Couldn't tell him anything. The fever was rising fast, pulling him under. He shivered violently despite the warm southern air. "Stay with me," Jeremiah begged. "Please, just stay with me." The rain fell harder. Night came early, darkness pressing in from all sides. Somewhere in the distance, dogs barked. Searchers, maybe, coming to finish what they'd started. Jeremiah pulled Zeke deeper into the shadows, covering them both with fallen branches and moss. They would stay hidden until morning. Had to. No choice now. Zeke drifted in and out of consciousness. Sarah's face appeared in his fever dreams. Samuel's laughter. The ironwood tree swaying in wind that carried the smell of smoke and blood. Everything they'd built. Everyone who'd helped. All of it destroyed in one coordinated strike. The machine had won. Again. The rain had softened to a drizzle by the time dawn light filtered through the canopy. Gray and weak, barely enough to see by. Water dripped steadily from cypress branches overhead, creating a constant rhythm that filled the silence. Jeremiah hadn't slept. He'd spent the entire night watching Zeke's labored breathing, listening for searchers who never came. Now, with enough light to work by, he examined the shoulder wound more carefully. The flesh around the bullet hole was swollen and hot to the touch. Red streaks spread outward from the entry point, infection setting in fast. Jeremiah had seen wounds like this before, back when Reuben patched up circle members after skirmishes. He remembered the medic's words: "Clean it first. Pressure to stop bleeding. Keep it elevated if possible." But Reuben was dead now. They were all dead. Jeremiah pushed the thought away, focused on what he could control. He tore more strips from his already ragged shirt, creating makeshift bandages, found a patch of Spanish moss that looked relatively clean, and pressed it against the wound to draw out infection. Another trick he'd seen Reuben use. The moss was supposed to have natural healing properties, though Jeremiah wasn't sure if that was true or just swamp folklore? Zeke stirred, mumbling something incoherent. His eyes opened briefly, unfocused and glazed with fever. "Sarah," he whispered. "Where's Sarah?" "She's not here, Zeke." "You're in the swamp. You got shot, remember? Samuel needs his breakfast. He gets hungry early. Always hungry, that boy." Zeke's voice was distant, lost somewhere between dream and memory. "Mama Ruth wants to hang the washing. Says the rain's clearing." Jeremiah pressed the moss bandage more firmly, trying to anchor Zeke to the present through physical sensation. "You need to stay still. Don't move. The infection's spreading." But Zeke wasn't listening. He was somewhere else entirely. "I told her I'd be home by supper," Zeke continued, his words slurring together. "Promised her. Can't break a promise to Sarah. She'll worry." His body trembled violently. The fever was getting worse, not better. Jeremiah soaked a piece of cloth in the relatively cool swamp water and placed it across Zeke's forehead, trying to bring the temperature down. "Samuel wants to learn to read," Zeke said suddenly, his voice clearer now. "Smart boy. So smart. I bought him a book in Mobile about trains. He loves trains." Jeremiah watched helplessly as tears slid down Zeke's face, cutting tracks through the dirt and sweat. "They're gone," Zeke whispered. "Aren't they? All gone. I wasn't here. I wasn't here to protect them." "No," Jeremiah said firmly. "Don't think about that now. You need to save your strength." But Zeke's eyes were open now, staring up through the canopy at the gray sky beyond. "I should have been here. Should have never left. What good was any of it? Fighting overseas while they died here? You couldn't have known." "I should have known." Zeke's voice hardened despite the fever. "This country, this system, it was always going to come for them. For all of us. I knew that. I knew." He tried to sit up, his good arm pushing against the muddy ground. Jeremiah held him down gently. "Easy. Don't move yet. No more waiting," Zeke said. "No more hiding. They took everything. Everything." His eyes were burning now, fever and fury mixing together into something sharp and focused. Even weakened, even infected. There was a clarity in his gaze that hadn't been there before. "I see them," he said quietly. "Sarah, Samuel, Mama Ruth. They're telling me not to give up, not to let this end here." Jeremiah wasn't sure if Zeke was hallucinating again or speaking metaphorically. It didn't matter. The resolve was real either way. The morning stretched on. Jeremiah kept changing the bandages, kept cooling Zeke's forehead, kept watching the surrounding swamp for any sign of searchers. The dogs he'd heard last night never materialized. Maybe the rain had washed away their scent trail. Maybe the searchers had given up, assuming they'd died in the swamp. Or maybe they were still coming. Around noon, Jeremiah heard movement in the brush. He grabbed a broken branch, ready to fight, despite knowing how useless it would be. Then Miles pushed through the palmetto fronds, his face covered in mud and exhaustion. Behind him came Nora, limping badly, and Reuben, one arm wrapped in blood-stained cloth. Jeremiah nearly collapsed with relief. "I thought I saw you." "You saw us go down," Miles said. "But we ain't dead yet." He looked at Zeke's unconscious form. "How bad?" "Infected. Fever. He's been hallucinating all morning." Reuben knelt beside Zeke immediately, his medical training overriding his own injuries. He examined the wound with practiced efficiency, his face grim. "Bullet went clean through, at least. That's good. But this infection—" He pulled supplies from a small pack, actual medical supplies, somehow salvaged from the chaos. "We need to clean this properly. Now." While Reuben worked, the others constructed a shelter. Miles cut branches with a knife he'd kept hidden in his boot. Nora spread a salvaged tarp across the frame, creating a crude roof that would keep the worst of the rain off. They worked quickly, efficiently, falling into the coordinated rhythm that had made the circle effective. Even injured, even scattered, they knew how to function as a unit. Reuben cleaned Zeke's wound with something that made him scream even in unconsciousness. Alcohol, Reuben explained to Jeremiah, burns like hell but kills the infection. He packed the wound with clean gauze, then wrapped it tightly. He'll live. If we can keep him still for a day or two, let the fever break. We don't have a day or two, Miles said quietly. Everyone looked at him. I circled back after the ambush, Miles continued. Got close enough to hear them talking. Boone and his people. They're meeting tonight, finalizing something big. Retaliation operations, they called it. Against every black family they suspect of resistance. Nora leaned forward. Where? Lodge near the state border. Secluded. Heavily guarded. Jeremiah's stomach tightened. I know that place. I heard them mention it before. When they... He trailed off, unable to finish. When they forced you to inform, Zeke said weakly. Everyone turned. Zeke's eyes were open, clearer now, though still fever-bright. He was listening. I can help, Jeremiah said quickly. I can serve as a decoy. Draw the guards away. Give you a chance to... To what? Nora asked. We lost the evidence. The federal agent is dead. What are we even fighting for now? Zeke pushed himself up slowly, ignoring Reuben's protests. His voice was rough but steady. We're fighting because that's all we have left. Because if we stop, they win completely. Because my family deserves more than us hiding in a swamp, while their killers plan the next massacre. He looked at each of them in turn. I won't force anyone. You've all lost enough, but I'm going, tonight, even if I have to crawl there. Silence fell over the shelter. Rain pattered against the tarp above. Miles spoke first. I'm in. Me too, Nora said. Reuben sighed. Somebody has to keep you all from bleeding out. Count me in. Jeremiah nodded. I'll be the decoy. I owe you all that much. I owe them. They spent the afternoon preparing, cleaning weapons that had survived the ambush, reviewing what they knew about the lodge's layout, marking swamp routes on a crude map Nora sketched in the dirt. Zeke remained sitting, conserving his strength. His shoulder throbbed with every heartbeat, but his mind was clearer than it had been in days. The fever dreams of his family had crystallized into something sharp and purposeful. They weren't haunting him, they were guiding him. As evening approached, Reuben changed Zeke's bandages one final time. You shouldn't be walking, shouldn't even be conscious. I know, Zeke said simply. The sun set behind thick clouds, never fully visible. Darkness came gradually, the swamp filling with night sounds, frogs calling, insects humming, water moving in slow currents. The circle gathered their equipment in silence. Miles distributed what ammunition they had left. Nora checked her signal flares. Jeremiah carved subtle marks into nearby tree trunks, coded directions in case anyone got separated. Zeke stood slowly, testing his balance. His legs were weak, but held. His shoulder screamed with pain, but he pushed it down, locked it away in the same mental compartment he'd used during wartime missions. Everyone ready? Miles asked quietly. Nods all around. They left the shelter in single file. Miles in front, navigating by moonlight that filtered weakly through the canopy. Then Nora, Reuben, Jeremiah, Zeke at the rear, moving slower than the others but keeping pace. The swamp wrapped around them like a living thing. Spanish moss brushed their faces. Cypress roots jutted from black water. The path was barely visible, more memory than trail, but they moved with purpose now. Unified, the ironwood circle, reduced but unbroken. Zeke felt his family walking beside him, Sarah's steady presence, Samuel's bright energy, Mama Ruth's quiet strength. They weren't ghosts. They were fuel. The group traveled for hours, silent except for necessary signals. The lodge was still miles away, but they would reach it before dawn. The lodge sat like a predator's den in the clearing ahead. Yellow lantern lights spilled from tall windows, casting long shadows across manicured grass that looked unnatural this deep in the woods. Zeke lay flat in the undergrowth, feeling dampness seep through his clothes. His shoulder pulsed with each heartbeat, but he ignored it. Pain was information, nothing more. Beside him, Miles studied the perimeter through stolen binoculars. 6 guards visible, probably more inside. 3 vehicles parked front. Communication wire runs to that post there. Nora crouched nearby, her radio equipment packed away for silence. I count 8 men through the windows. Boone's in the center. Looks like they're arguing already. Reuben pressed fresh gauze against Zeke's shoulder. You're bleeding through again. It'll hold, Zeke whispered. They had arrived just before midnight, circling the lodge twice to map every entrance and guard position. The building was larger than expected, a hunting retreat that probably belonged to one of the conspirators. Expensive, isolated, perfect for planning atrocities without witnesses. Jeremiah checked his watch. 5 minutes, then I move. Zeke grabbed his arm gently. You don't have to do this. We can find another way. No other way gets them all looking in the wrong direction. Jeremiah managed a weak smile. Besides, I got debts to pay. To your family. To everyone they've hurt. Stay alive, Zeke said simply. That's how you pay it. Jeremiah nodded, then slipped away into the darkness. He moved with surprising stealth for someone who'd never received military training. Fear made people capable of remarkable things. Minutes crawled past. Zeke watched the guards, memorizing their patterns. One smoked near the vehicles. Another walked the perimeter with a shotgun. 2 stood at the front entrance, talking quietly. Then Jeremiah's shape appeared at the edge of the clearing, illuminated by deliberate moonlight. He stumbled forward, making noise, making himself visible. Hey! Someone! Help! The guards reacted instantly. Shouts erupted. 3 of them rushed toward Jeremiah, weapons raised. The smoker dropped his cigarette and ran to join them. Jeremiah turned and sprinted into the woods, leading them away from the lodge. His voice carried back through the trees, panicked and loud, drawing them deeper into pursuit. Now, Miles whispered. The circle moved as one unit. Zeke and Miles approached the parked vehicles, while Nora circled toward the communication post. Reuben stayed in reserve, watching for additional threats. Zeke reached the first truck, a heavy Ford with mud-caked tires. He pulled a knife from his belt and punctured 2 tires with quick, silent stabs. Air hissed out slowly. Miles disabled the second vehicle by pulling distributor caps from the engine, pocketing them. Nora found the communication wire exactly where Miles had spotted it. She produced wire cutters and severed it cleanly, then scattered the ends to make reconnection difficult. Inside the lodge, someone noticed. A face appeared at the window, peering into darkness. Zeke whistled, low, bird-like, deliberate. The sound echoed across the clearing, seeming to come from multiple directions at once. A trick he'd learned in the Pacific, using terrain to amplify and confuse. Another whistle answered from the opposite side. Miles, coordinating perfectly. The face in the window disappeared. Voices rose inside, agitated. Zeke circled to the rear of the building, keeping to shadows. He found a window cracked open for ventilation and listened. Someone out there. I saw movement. Your guards see anything? Half of them ran off chasing some Negro. Probably locals who don't know when to stay away. Then why are you sweating, Richards? Zeke waited, counting heartbeats. Then he struck a match and held it briefly before a gap in the curtains. Just long enough to be glimpsed. He dropped it and moved immediately. Someone inside shouted, "There! Light! Someone's watching us!" Paranoia spread like fire. Zeke heard chairs scraping, doors slamming. He moved to another window, tapped the glass twice with his knife handle, then vanished again. Miles was doing the same on the opposite side, creating the impression of multiple observers, of being surrounded. Judge Boone's voice cut through the chaos. "Calm down! It's probably nothing. Animals. Wind." But his voice carried doubt, fear. Zeke returned to the front, where Reuben had positioned himself behind the remaining guard. A quick strike to the back of the head dropped the man silently. Reuben caught him, lowered him gently, then bound and gagged him with practiced efficiency. Inside the lodge, arguments escalated. This whole operation is compromised. Someone talked. Nobody talked. You're paranoid. Then explain the federal agent. Explain how they knew to expect him. Zeke smiled grimly. The seeds of distrust had already been planted. He was just watering them. Nora appeared at his side, breathing hard. Microphones active. Recording everything. Good. Stay low. Through the window, Zeke watched the meeting disintegrate. Two men stood abruptly, grabbing their coats. I'm leaving. This is insanity. Boone blocked their path. You leave now. You confirm every suspicion. Then I confirm them. Better than dying because you've lost control. They pushed past him, heading for the door. Miles was ready. As the two men rushed outside and ran for the vehicles, he appeared from shadow, wielding a branch. He struck one across the legs, hard enough to drop him, not hard enough to break bone. The man went down shouting. The second stumbled over his fallen companion, sprawling into mud. Zeke stepped from darkness, standing over them. His voice was cold, precise. Who gave the order to kill my family? Both men stared up at him, terrified. One found his voice. Boone! It was Boone! He ordered everything. Liar! The other man snarled. You were there! You voted for it! They turned on each other instantly, shouting accusations. Zeke left them there, their voices carrying back to the lodge, where others could hear the betrayal. He moved to the entrance. The door hung open where the fleeing men had abandoned it. Inside, chaos reigned. Boone stood at the center, red-faced and furious. 4 other men surrounded him, all talking at once. Someone sabotaged the vehicles. Communication lines cut. Where are the guards? Richards and Montgomery just accused each other of... Zeke stepped inside. Silence fell like a blade. He stood in the doorway, mud-covered, blood seeping through his shoulder bandage, eyes burning with controlled fury. The black Mamba returned from the dead. Zeke Turner, Boone whispered. You're supposed to be... dead? Zeke's voice was quiet, deadly. Like my family? Like all the others you've murdered? I don't know what you're talking about. Yes, you do. Zeke pulled folded papers from inside his jacket. Water-stained, but readable. Copies Jeremiah had painstakingly recreated from memory after the originals were stolen. Financial records, orders, names, including yours. He dropped them on the floor. Jeremiah Cole memorized everything before they burned your headquarters. Every detail. Every transaction. Every family you targeted. Boone's face drained of color. He looked at his assembled conspirators. He's bluffing. It's not real. But the others were backing away. Doubting. Afraid. One spoke carefully. If he's lying, why are we surrounded? Why are the guards gone? They're not gone! They're... A whistle echoed from outside. Then another. Then a third, from impossible directions. Boone spun, searching shadows. How many of them are there? Enough, Zeke said simply. In truth, there were only 4. But fear and guilt multiplied that number infinitely in the conspirators' minds. Another man bolted for the back exit. Miles was there, blocking the path with calm authority. The man reversed course, ran into furniture, fell. Nora's voice crackled from somewhere unseen. She'd positioned a salvaged speaker near a window, her voice distorted through static. Federal authorities have been notified. Recording evidence. All participants identified. It was a bluff, but they didn't know that. Boone's composure shattered completely. This is your fault. He pointed at the man nearest him. You said this location was secure. My fault? You're the one who ordered the Turner family killed. You brought this down on us. I gave no such order. You did. We all heard you. The room erupted. Men shouting, blaming, accusing. Zeke watched them devour each other, the network collapsing from within exactly as he'd planned. Reuben appeared at the doorway, signaling. Time to go. Zeke backed toward the exit slowly, keeping the conspirators in view. None of them even noticed his departure. They were too consumed by mutual destruction. Outside, Nora had already gathered the recording equipment. Miles had secured the documents and disabled the remaining vehicle. The two men who'd tried to flee earlier were still arguing on the ground, bound together by rope. Jeremiah emerged from the woods, breathing hard, scratches across his face. The guards he'd led away were still lost somewhere in the forest, chasing shadows. Everyone accounted for? Zeke asked quietly. Nods all around. They moved as one into the tree line. Behind them, the lodge continued its implosion. Glass shattered as someone threw something. Voices rose in accusation and rage. The circle traveled steadily northeast, following pre-marked trees toward the train line. Dawn was still hours away, but they had time now. The conspiracy had torn itself apart. Zeke walked at the rear again, his shoulders screaming, his body exhausted. But his mind was clear. Sarah, Samuel, Mama Ruth. He'd kept his promise. Not through simple revenge, but through complete dismantling of the machine that killed them. The forest swallowed them whole, and they moved like ghosts toward the next chapter. The forest thinned as the sun climbed above the horizon, painting the eastern sky in shades of amber and pale gold. Zeke walked ahead, setting the pace despite his wounded shoulder. Behind him, Miles and Nora followed in careful silence, while Reuben brought up the rear, constantly checking for pursuit that never came. The rail junction emerged from morning mist, like something out of a dream. A weathered platform stood beside rusted tracks that stretched endlessly in both directions. A single bench sat empty. Beyond it, an old maintenance shed leaned precariously to one side. Sergeant Hayes stood beside that shed, arms crossed, eyes scanning the tree line with military precision. He was a compact man, maybe 50 years old, with graying temples and hands that looked like they'd seen every kind of hard work. When he spotted the circle, he didn't wave or call out. He simply nodded once, acknowledging their arrival. Zeke approached first. Sergeant? Turner. Hayes's voice was gravelly, economical. You look like hell. Feel worse. Hayes glanced at the others. This, everyone? Everyone who made it, Miles said quietly. Hayes absorbed that information with the stillness of someone who'd received similar news too many times before. I'm sorry. Nora stepped forward, carrying the canvas bag that held their evidence. Recordings on wire spools, written testimony transcribed in her careful handwriting, photographs of documents, confessions captured during the lodge chaos. Everything's here, she said. Names, dates, financial transactions, enough to bring down the entire state network. Hayes took the bag, testing its weight. He opened it briefly, examining contents with the practiced eye of someone who understood what he was looking at. You did good work. Dangerous work. Necessary work, Zeke corrected. Hayes met his gaze. Something passed between them. Veteran to veteran, soldier to soldier. Understanding that didn't require words. I'll get this to Washington, Hayes said. Federal investigators I trust. Men who won't bury it or sell it back to the people it exposes. He closed the bag carefully, securing the straps. You have my word. Your word's enough, Zeke said. Hayes produced a pocket watch, checked the time. Train comes through in 20 minutes. I'll be on it. 3 days to Washington, maybe 4 if weather slows us down. He looked at each of them in turn. What will you do? Go home, Miles said simply. Make sure people understand what happened here, Nora added. Reuben said nothing, but his expression conveyed everything necessary. Hayes turned last to Zeke. And you? Zeke didn't answer immediately. He gazed down the tracks, watching heat shimmer rise from the rails as the sun climbed higher. Finally, finish what we started. Hayes nodded slowly. Good man. He extended his hand. Zeke shook it firmly, despite the pain radiating from his shoulder. Travel safe. Always do. The circle waited until the distant whistle of an approaching train echoed across the morning. Hayes boarded efficiently when it arrived, disappearing into a passenger car with the evidence bag held close. The train pulled away, gathering speed, carrying hope toward distant authority. They stood watching until it vanished completely around a distant bend. "Now what?" Nora asked. "Now we go back," Zeke said. By noon, Pine Hollow's main street shimmered under intense heat. The three of them walked openly through town. No more hiding, no more skulking through back paths and shadows. People watched from windows and doorways, some with suspicion, others with something that might have been respect. Sheriff Redden waited outside his office, leaning against the brick wall with his hat in his hands. When he saw them approaching, he straightened but didn't reach for his weapon. "Turner," he said, "heard you had an interesting night." "Could say that." Redden's expression was complicated. Relief mixed with exhaustion, mixed with something deeper. State police came through about an hour ago, arrested Judge Boone and 6 others, found them at that lodge near the border, half dead from fighting each other. He paused. "They're saying it was internal conspiracy, betrayals, people turning on their own." "Sometimes that's exactly what it is," Zeke said carefully. Redden studied him for a long moment. "You know anything about that?" "I know justice comes in different forms." The sheriff absorbed this, turning his hat slowly in his hands. "Federal investigators are arriving tomorrow. Want statements from everyone involved. They're treating this as organized criminal conspiracy across state lines." "Good." "I'm resigning," Redden said abruptly. "End of the week. Then I'm testifying at whatever hearings they hold. Full cooperation." He met Zeke's eyes. "Figure it's the least I can do. Should have done more years ago." "You did what you could when it mattered most," Zeke said. "That counts." Redden's jaw tightened. He extended his hand. "Thank you." Zeke shook it. Behind him, Miles and Reuben waited patiently. "One more thing," Redden said. "The ironwood tree. Federal authorities have marked it as evidence. Nobody's allowed near it until the investigation concludes. After that," he trailed off, uncertain. "After that, it becomes something else," Zeke finished. "Something better." "Hope you're right." They parted ways at the corner. Redden returned to his office. Zeke led the circle toward the eastern edge of town, where familiar landmarks waited. The afternoon sun blazed mercilessly as they walked dirt paths between modest homes. Children played in yards again, their laughter carrying across the breeze. Families sat on porches, talking openly instead of whispering behind closed doors. The Harrison family had returned. Their home stood repaired, new boards replacing burned ones, fresh paint covering smoke damage. Mr. Harrison waved from the porch, his wife beside him, their children running circles in the front yard. "Thank you," Harrison called out. Just those 2 words, but they carried weight. Zeke nodded acknowledgement and kept walking. They passed Mrs. Ellery's house. She sat in her rocking chair, watching the road. When she saw Zeke, tears streamed down her weathered face. She didn't speak, but she raised one trembling hand in silent salute. He returned it. Finally, they reached the path leading to Zeke's property. The burned cabin remained untouched, but the land around it showed signs of subtle care. Someone had cleared debris. Someone had planted flowers near the graves. The ironwood tree rose ahead, massive and ancient. Yellow rope now cordoned it off, federal markers attached at intervals, warning unauthorized persons away. But the rope that had hung from its branches was gone, removed as evidence. Zeke approached the barrier, stopping just outside it. Miles and Reuben hung back, giving him space. He stood there for a long time, studying the tree that had witnessed so much horror. But he noticed something else now. New growth sprouting from the base, green shoots reaching toward sunlight, life persisting despite everything. "It'll mean something different soon," he said, quietly to no one in particular. "I hope you found that story powerful. Leave a like on the video and subscribe so that you do not miss out on the next one. I have handpicked 2 stories for you that are even more powerful. Have a great day.